Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so, then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief lead writer, Sonia Sodha, and the columnist for the article, Ali Miraj, on a huge night of news, it has to be said. Let's just see how the papers, shall we, are reacting to all of what's happened. As you'll see, developments in the George Floyd and the Football Super League stories have been fast-moving. Let's show you the first editions that we've received so far, beginning with the Telegraph, which shows the celebrations outside the court in Minneapolis after the guilty verdicts in George Floyd's murder trial, though their main story concerns the incredibly small number of hospital admissions for COVID among people who've been vaccinated. They do mention the Super League at the very top there. Metro, which received some time ago, has word of Chelsea and Manchester City's intention to withdraw from football's new European Super League. Their headline, they think it's all over. Here's the Times headline then, Super League crumbles as clubs bow to fan fury. Defeat of greed is how the Daily Mail describes today's developments. The Eye calls the story an own goal for football. The Guardian pictures jubilant Chelsea fans outside Stamford Bridge after their teams climbed down. The Sun also in an exultant mood, proclaiming cheerio, cheerio, cheerio. The Star mocks the 6 English clubs who are lined up to take part, declaring their knees have gone all trembly. While the Mirror attempts a pun of sorts, you're not singing anymore. In other news, the Express hears that the government plans to send antibiotic pills to people self-isolating with COVID at home in the hope of allowing them to recover more quickly. According to the Financial Times, without explicitly naming the United States, China's President Xi Jinping has challenged America's approach to global affairs. Well, plenty to discuss then. Sonia Sodha, Ali Miraj are here. And certainly the collapse, or the seeming collapse, of the European Super League and this successful conviction of Derek Chauvin had people power behind it, didn't it? Let's start with the Daily Mail. It covers both those stories. Guilty, it says, first of all, for George Floyd, and 2 on the European Super League story. But let's start with George Floyd. Sonia, your reaction. We've seen the scenes in Minneapolis. What do you feel about what you've seen?
Well, I think overwhelmingly it's a sense of relief at the end of a year of kind of great sadness. I think it's a really historic conviction. I think all thoughts have to be with George Floyd's family, and indeed we've been hearing from some of his siblings just now in that press conference. I think the reason why it's so historic is that it's really uncommon for officers on duty to be convicted of sort of unlawful killings. And the reason why it happened in this case is because a very brave young black woman captured on footage the moments, the horrifying, horrific moments in which Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And it was because of that footage, I think, that it was much easier for prosecutors to kind of successfully take a case against Derek Chauvin. So I think going forward, I mean, it is a really historic moment for America. It's a moment of reckoning in terms of racial injustice. We've known. George Floyd is by far from the only black person to be killed by white police officers in the US, but it is unusual because in this case, Derek Chauvin has been charged with his murder. But I think it's only and today we saw Derek Chauvin as an individual being held accountable for his awful crime. But I think going forwards for the US, this is just the first step, I think, in terms of that reckoning around racial injustice that, the US has been grappling with for so long.
Yes, indeed. As you say, members of George Floyd's family have been speaking. We'll hear from them shortly, certainly. But in the meantime, Amanda Gorman, who spoke so eloquently at the inauguration of Joe Biden, Ali, has said a reminder that victory would be George Floyd being alive. Every day, black Americans worry if they will be next is another day without justice. And certainly many people, if we look at the scenes on the front page of the Telegraph, the huge jubilation, for many people, this is just the first step, isn't it?
It is, and there's a serious problem with unscrupulous police officers in the US who abuse their badge to inflict harm and, in this case, murder someone. I mean, it's absolutely beyond the pale. I mean, you think back to 1992 with the beating up of Rodney King, which again was captured on camera. And when those officers who did that were acquitted, there were riots that lasted for days, resulting in the deaths of over 60 people. Thankfully, that has not happened here, but tensions clearly were running extremely high on the streets of Minneapolis. And only at the weekend, another Black American was also killed, Daunte Wright. So tensions have been running really, really high. I mean, our thoughts are with the family of George Floyd this evening. Justice seems to have been done here, which is good. It's a very, very big step forward for America. I do think, however, that politicians need to be very careful in these trials when these trials are ongoing and live, because they could prejudice the results. I mean, we've already had this case of a Democrat congresswoman making statements which the trial judge himself said were really deeply unhelpful. And we also had the US president also saying that he was hoping for the right result. So politicians should just be really, really careful in jury trials of prejudicing them and let the legal
yeah, except, Ali, in this case, they were sequestered, weren't they? So they wouldn't have heard those comments of Joe Biden, who said, in fact, he thought the case was made overwhelmingly. Nancy Pelosi's just tweeted too, George Floyd should be alive today. Similar sentiment. His family's calls for justice for his murder were heard around the world. He did not die in vain. And in fact, the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis has just also put out a statement. We want to reach out to the community and still express our deep remorse for their pain as we feel it every day as well. There are no winners in this case, and we respect the jury's decision. We need the political pandering to stop and the race baiting of elected officials to stop. We need to stop the divisive comments, and we all need to do better to create a Minneapolis we all love. Obviously, this is difficult for police officers too, isn't it, this case, Sonia? But the scenes outside, the relief, the tears from everybody, does it go some way, do you think, to answer the pain of people around the world, really, who came out, on their own feet to protest at this death?
Yeah, well, I think that's why there's a lot of relief there, because I think anyone who saw that, I mean, it's just so haunting, the footage of what happened to George Floyd. You can't watch that footage and not think that Derek Chauvin should have been convicted of his murder, but it wasn't guaranteed. And so I think the US and indeed much of the world that's been watching this trial has been on tenterhooks, waiting to see what verdict the jury came back with. So I think there is a lot of relief that the jury has reached the right verdict. But I think, it's just relief, and it's just a first step in the sense that, yes, justice has been meted out in this case, but it's only one case.
The other big breaking news story tonight, which is reflected in the newspapers, as we can see, Ali, which is the Super League crumbles. This is the Times, as clubs bow to fan fury, Chelsea, Man City, and then the other English clubs. It really has been people power. These are the scenes at Chelsea earlier.
Well, absolutely, an absolutely huge story. And this was driven by money, basically, because you look at these leading clubs and they've had a torrid year for the past 12 months with the pandemic, but it goes beyond that. They made about 1.2 billion in collective losses, these 12 clubs. And this was driven by amassing wealth from this 4.5 billion that they would have got from this. I mean, you've got to look at the amount that these clubs spend on players is about 70 to 80% in some cases of all their income. So that's a serious problem. By joining this league is very much a sort of US style based on the NFL or the NBA, where you, in fact, cap wages, which is good. But this has really united fans, politicians, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Prince William, everyone against this, because there were always two rules for me with football. And I was a Watford season ticket holder for many years. Competition, fair competition, and community. That clubs are rooted in the heart of their communities. And this was fixing 15 clubs every year with no competitive element to go in there every year and play a competition for money. And that is something that needs to be addressed. It's good that it's falling apart here. But the bigger question is player pay. That has to be looked at. We can't have a situation where players are getting paid £20 million a season, in some cases for the top players, That is outrageous. It needs to be looked at, and that's causing a lot of problems for these clubs.
Indeed so. Daily Mail, defeat of greed, shamed by fans, players and politicians. Football giants surrender on this rebel league. Sonia making the point there that there was almost unified opposition to this, despite the need to get the revenue that these clubs desperately want.
That's right. And I think it's, it's just great to see, isn't it? I'm not a football fan myself, but it's great to see football fans kind of really making an impact here. And I find it quite extraordinary in some ways. So we've got all 6 English clubs that have pulled out, and lots of them have said, they were taken aback by the strength of the reaction. And it's kind of a bit like, what did you expect? If you just announce this, you don't have any buy-in from your grassroots supporters, you don't even have buy-in from your players. I mean, you had the captains, led by the Liverpool captains, sort of organising meets. You've got, the executive vice chairman of Manchester United resigning. So I think it just goes to show how as I said, I don't know loads about football myself, but I've been really taken aback how distant the people who own some of the biggest clubs are from the people who enjoy it. And that is a sign of quite a sick sort of, something's gone wrong in a sport like football, and that's the case. And I know that there's been lots of efforts to push football in the other direction, so towards fairer finance, as Ali's just talked about. And this was a move in kind of completely the opposite direction. And I'm just delighted for all the fans who've had an impact and kind of, said, no, we're not standing for this, and have got, the little man's got their, the little people have got their way, and that's just fantastic. Yeah. They're the important ones.
Well, not just the fans, some of the players too, even managers of the teams that were involved here. There's the own goal, chaos among elite football clubs as breakaway Super League is on the verge of collapse. Obviously, now we know what's happened, I guess, unless the other 6 still continue. Daily Star as well, their knees have gone all trembly. Talking about Chelsea and Man City pulling out of the Super League first after owners do the impossible and unite players, coaches, royalty, celebs, God's best mate, and actually the whole world, they say, in a typical tongue-in-cheek fashion. But lots of reaction, no doubt, to that tomorrow, and the people power that led to that decision.